Hey everybody, my name is Mr. Little, aka Better Days here, and today I'm going to be talking about a mountain that I've had to climb over the course of my life, which is that of how much fiction means to me. Now, this all started back when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and I first encountered a cute, quaint little Swedish game called Minecraft. My babysitter at the time had a boyfriend who would let me play on his phone when he would come over, and he had Minecraft on his phone and would let me play on a super flat world and just kind of build whatever I wanted. Now, I'm not here to trauma dump, and so I'm not going to go in super detailed depth on my childhood or anything, but one thing to know for sure is that I had a very controlling dad in a lot of ways, and it left me with a very severe lack of autonomy. Now, because of that, I was seeking an escape. I was seeking somewhere to go that I felt like I could have my own autonomy, and I could do my own things, make my own choices, create my own future. And Minecraft gave me exactly that, and it was the first video game ever that truly changed my life. And it gave me a creative sandbox of freedom that I just couldn't have found anywhere else. I mean, the closest I'd found up to that point was Legos, but even that had its physical limitations. So, interestingly enough, I stuck with Minecraft for a good few years. Then when they got bought out by Microsoft, I actually ended up swapping over to Terraria more than anything. And it was interesting because I found that at this point in my life, around the age of 14 to 15 years old, I was finding myself far more heavily drawn to companies and corporations that treated their games right, and treated their games with respect, and their communities with the respect that they deserve for having built their games from the ground up like they did. So, with that being said, I wasn't really empathetic toward fictional characters until a specific game known as Portal and Portal 2 came into my life, and I actually have a very specific someone to thank for that, who is now currently my boyfriend. So, for a little backstory on my boyfriend, who I will from this point on refer to as B, he was my grandpa's caretaker for essentially as far as I can remember back into my childhood, and he was essentially the only adult that I had in my childhood that I felt like I could truly, fully trust. That I felt like I truly had a proper connection with that went beyond just talking about surface level adult things. Because the adults in my life, they were always so dead set on talking about adult things with me. And as a kid, I didn't really understand that, obviously, so having somebody to talk to my things about that absolutely understood and related to it, it meant the world to me as a kid at the time. This freaking jump right here. Anyway, I'm trying not to add commentary to the climb, but it's difficult. Anyway, so the reason I bring up Portal and Portal 2 is because there was a specific line in Portal 2 that really resonated with me, and it was from Wheatley. And while I don't remember the exact line word for word, it was something along the lines of when the turrets, the sentient turrets, were being thrown into an incinerator, he makes the point that they feel a simulated sort of pain. Although, regardless of being simulated, that pain is still just as real to them as our pain is to us. And I thought that was a fascinating point that he made, because it really gave me a whole brand new perspective on the fiction that I'd been indulging in over all these years. Suddenly, all the Endermen that I'd killed weren't just numbers and code, they were actual creatures with, a backstory and lore, even if they were still just simple tall creatures in a block game. And it was interesting, because it opened my mind to so many possibilities of what I'm kind of capable of empathetically. And when it comes to it, I want to spread that same feeling of connection and empathy toward not just fiction, but the world. I want to extend that toward the world. And that brings me on to the next game that really had a heavy effect on me, which is Undertale. Now, I could go in depth for hours about Undertale and all the effects that it had on me and all the ways that it connects back to my life. But to put it simply, I basically related to every character in that game so hard, or nearly every character in that game so hard, that the game essentially became a mirror for my own reality. And it was fascinating and terrifying all at the same time. I ended up basically addicted to the game, which in turn resulted in somewhat of an unhealthy obsession that unfortunately drove something of a wedge between my sister and I. And this is something I can go in depth on for a while, but again, that would draw the video out, and I'm not here to drama dump, so the point being, this line from Wheatley, the Portal 2 line, it really heavily resonated with me, in the sense that, especially when playing a game like Undertale, I felt like these characters actually had their own existences, their own reasons to live, their own determination, if you will. And it was fascinating to me how, when I got to Megalovania, when I got to the Sans boss fight, it was so very difficult for me. Hold on. Lock in. It was so very difficult for me to push forward through that fight, and I couldn't the first time, but it was so difficult because of the connection that I held to the game, and the connection that I held to my sister and Sans as a character. It was fascinating to me how heavily drawn to these fictional worlds I was. And actually, another interesting point is on the next one, which is that of the Lego Movie. Now, this is such a silly movie that gained such a cult following for such a good reason. And it's because it tells the exact story that I've been trying to tell my entire life, as well as many other people, of corporate-esque authority having full say over the future of our imaginations and our creativity, and how that's displayed within the mind of a child. And frankly, I've never wanted to tell the world anything more than the exact message that the Lego Movie sends. And frankly, I'm so grateful that that movie came into my life when it did, because as of now, I've watched it well over 125 times, and do not plan on stopping anytime soon. But with that being said, there's good reason that I've watched it that many times, and it's not because I just enjoy the movie. See, that's one of the big things I feel like is a big problem in our society. A lot of people, they'll tune into fiction, but they'll simply enjoy it, without thinking too deep about it. That's something I was talking to my mom about recently, and she made a really good point, that her generation has this mindset from back when cartoons and video games were much simpler during her childhood, of the idea that they're supposed to be simple, and that simply isn't the case anymore. And that's a fair point that she made, and frankly, I completely agree with that. The fact that older generations are going to have a harder time connecting to newer video games and newer fictional franchises simply because of the fact that they're completely unused to the fact that these franchises have the ability to be as deep as their live-action franchises, as something based in reality. So, if anything, though, I would like to make a point that states the exact opposite. That it's actually more possible to tell more stories and to present more ideas with fiction, with specifically animated fiction, because it creates this sort of rift between fantasy and reality that allows the artists to get as creative as having entire other planets with a gem species, or, having entire game worlds get destroyed after a video game character wins, right? And it's like these kinds of shows, this is Steven Universe and Gameaverse that I just referenced, for those that didn't catch that, but for these types of shows, and these types of franchises in general, they have a much deeper message to tell than just, haha, silly cat girl and rock guy go and No! That's okay. Silly cat girl and rock guy go on adventures to save the world. Like, no. Because, see, that's something that I actually really applaud Adventure Time for. Because Adventure Time does a really good job of being a really simple show at the very beginning, and then as soon as Rebecca Sugar took over the writing, it turned into a really deep, emotional, traumatic story about basically every character. And it was incredibly impressive how they managed to turn a story about a hero stopping an Ice King from capturing princesses into a beautiful love story about love, loss, sacrifice, the loss of your world, the loss of your loved ones, the gaining of new loved ones in times of hardship, and the acceptance of others. There's so many important lessons to be learned from a show like Adventure Time, and I haven't even watched the full thing all the way through. So, if that goes to show you, just with what little I know about it, from seasons like 1 to 4 that I think I've watched as a child, and, lore videos that break down the lore and all that, it's definitely a very fascinating franchise to me, but it's just one of many that has that sort of representative idealism in it. And it's very important that we begin to recognize that these fictional franchises have this idealism in them, and this philosophy in them, because it's ultimately trying to teach us something. And if we're willing to listen to what it has to teach us, then I think we can understand the world all that much better. And frankly, that's my exact goal, having become an adult now. Now, I'm 23 going on 24, so I've been an adult for a little minute, but at the same time, I'm still relatively fresh into the whole, reality scene, if you will, especially with how closely attached to fiction I was as a child. But with that being said, it also is worth acknowledging that I've had a lot of distance and disconnect from reality as a whole, thanks to, unfortunately, my father, who was extremely cold and extremely closed off about allowing me to express my special interests and share who I was as a person. So, it's worth noting, by the way, before I rag on my dad anymore, that he's got a mindset that's heavily based in Scientology, so I feel like I have every right to rant on him a little. But that's beside the point. Regardless, these fictional worlds we indulge in, including this one in the background here, Getting Over It, they all have a message to tell. They all have a story to share. And even if it's a simple story, there's always a deeper metaphor hidden within the human meaning behind the game. And that's one of the most important things that we can take away from anything when it comes to fiction. Whether it be Adventure Time teaching us about love and loss, Steven Universe teaching us about different forms of love, or Minecraft simply letting us be creative and express what we want to do, and what we want to be, and who we want to be, and how we want to feel. It's the difference between a franchise like, for example, Super Mario, and, say, the Stanley Parable, right? Someone who plays Super Mario is typically looking to shut off their brain to relax, because they want nothing more than to jump around, squash things, and keep themselves entertained for an hour. Somebody that plays the Stanley Parable, if it's not a first-time player, ultimately knows what they're getting themselves into when they play a game like the Stanley Parable, or Undertale, or Deltarune, or Omori, or Hollow Knight, or any of these types of games that have much deeper, darker, harder core meaning to them, is these people that play these games, they realize that those types of games, and they end up understanding more about the world because they understand those messages from the games. And that's one of the most fascinating things about not just games, but fiction in general to me, is the fact that it's basically being utilized. I'm freaking gonna slice this bucket off this rope here in a minute. I swear. Okay. Sorry about that. Had to get over the bucket real quick. Anyway, the point I would like to make with all of this, I suppose, and especially as someone going into the childcare industry who wants to see a better future, not just for the kids, but for all of humanity, is that the fiction we indulge in and the fiction that our children indulge in holds such deeper meaning than can be seen from the surface. And if you're a parent, please, as a kid that didn't have parents to talk to about this sort of thing, talk to your kids about their favorite video game, or their favorite book, or their favorite show. I promise you, no matter what happens, it will mean the world to them just to have you interact with them on their level. After all, that's all a kid wants. That being said, it's also worth acknowledging that it's not just for the kids that this fiction is made for, even if it might seem like it with how many cartoons are on the market nowadays. Cartoons can be just as much for adults as they can be for kids, and so can video games. It's just about finding the right one for you. It's kind of like saying, books are for kids. That's simply ridiculous, because there's so many books that kids couldn't even begin to understand. And the same is true for all fiction. Video games, TV, movies, and books. There's children's books that children can understand that have pictures and simple words, but they still have deeper meaning regardless. And it's worth acknowledging all of that. There was actually a really interesting video I watched recently, and I'll link it down in the description below, but it was about the old book, The Giving Tree, and how it felt like a story about a mother giving everything to an ungrateful child that ended up leaving one day, only to return later with nothing left. And it was a very sad, very introspective video, but it was also very insightful. And it really made me think about a lot of things, just about how, we kind of treat our parents and how our parents treat us. And I feel like it's kind of crazy how much we miss about each other, both children and parents, just by not understanding each other's fiction. Because when you think about it, nowadays in the digital age, fiction is everything. Fiction means everything to everyone. Everyone has a piece of fiction that they indulge in. And if they don't, they're like Amish or something. But regardless, with that being said, it's like a parent can just as easily have a child enjoy an appropriate show with them of theirs as they can go and enjoy a show with their child, like Adventure Time, and still gain just the same amount of depth out of it if they're willing to open their mind to the idea of doing so. So parents, please listen to your kiddos and hear them when they tell you about their favorite franchises, because oftentimes when a kiddo tells you about their favorite franchise, it's not about the franchise, it's about who they are as a person. And that's the most important thing you can acknowledge as a parent. Oh no, Bennett! That was actually doing pretty good, and then you fucked it up. So if there's anything I want you to take away from this video, if you're a parent, please listen to your children when they talk to you about their favorite franchises. It's not just about their franchise, it's about them. And kids, if you're watching, talk to your parents about your favorite things and see what they say. See if they get into it with you. You never know until you try. But until then, I'm wishing the best for all of you, and I hope to see better days in the future for you all. Cheers. 20 minutes, not bad.